Hello and welcome to Manic Mic'd Up, a dialogue series on the bipolar game changer news. And if you can tell from my voice, I just woke up recently, but I feel like getting into a dialogue, which I'll probably do a few segments throughout the day. A few days ago, I started by saying I was going to do a 30-day challenge. And I already know that whenever I say, this is what I'm going to do, I don't do it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for me. It just means I do something else. I create something else. It means I can't mechanize my flow. And so now I just realized that this Manic Mic'd Up series will go on for however long it does. And the challenge is perhaps to do a dialogue every day, but I don't even want to say that much. But the challenge is to do a challenge of not doing a challenge, if you know what I mean. And I'm not going to talk about this very long, but originally I was thinking, okay, this is a good flow. Like, get up, make some coffee, read a bit of a paper book, which I used to do a lot, but I haven't done a lot lately. Go for a walk at the park, maybe go in the pool quickly, and then have a shower, and then do some other self-care wellness tools. I have a lot of wellness tools that I've collected over the years, but I tend not to do them now. And then around noon or 1 or 2, whenever I'm done all that, start to do work on the computer or work on my projects. And part of it was that it was quite hot outside, so getting out in the morning is quiet. It's not as hot, it's beautiful. The morning light is really good for the eyes, especially without sunglasses. And then yesterday, or the night before, I had a not so great sleep, not so restful. So I had to spend all day in bed and sort of working on things that way. And I didn't even really have energy to do anything until noon or 1. So there goes that whole morning routine. But I found a way to pivot and adjust and still work on projects. And I don't even want to say like be productive per se, because my projects thus far haven't been that productive. They're more maybe inductive. They're about memetics and context and looking into these subtle structures, at least right now with this energy. Sometimes it does something else, like make little prototypes out of pieces of junk and Dollarama items. But what seemed to happen was when I was at the park, I was listening to either some kind of educational material or listening to my conversations with my custom GPT, and then I'd have insights, and then I'd have something to talk about in dialogue. And then I would talk about the insights, and it just started getting into this expansion that probably takes a lot of energy. I don't know if the expansion is happening, and then that's why I'm watching that material and writing insights, or just having a bit of energy to be activated to start to learn and have insights makes my mind and brain sort of expand and use that energy. And so yesterday and the day before, I didn't really go into reading the book I was reading because it was creating too many insights. But then yesterday I did watch a couple of YouTube videos because I was tired and not able to. What I was not able to do was really read and process a lot of information. So it's almost like the process of reading and then expanding on insights and reading between the lines, seeing nuance and writing them down was a bit shut down. But it wasn't completely shut down because I could listen and watch some YouTube and have a few insights. So there's something about my eyes, I guess. There's something to do with the eyes there. So if I thought about it now and I was like, well, I never want that to happen again, I might say to myself, well, I won't read text. Maybe I'll listen to videos and things or podcasts. And if I have an insight, I'll write that down. But I like to read text too, of certain kinds. So this time I have been just adding to a reading list of things that say it's an email that I want to read, but not now because I kind of can't. And it would create too many insights. And that's one of the reasons why I'm starting off today just talking instead of sitting down with my coffee and starting to read and then have insights. But then the other thing is, there's also a limit to how much I can talk with my voice. So even today, it feels a little strained, maybe because I'm tired and I just woke up, or actually I did have a good sleep. So I feel substantially better. So at some point today, if my voice was like, oh, I can't talk anymore, then I would just go into working on projects, right? So there's certain constraints as well as expansions with the eyes and with the voice and with the body energy, with the brain energy, which is slightly different because the brain does take, I believe, about 20% of the body's energy, which is a lot considering it's about 5 pounds. So the per weight amount it takes, I'm pretty sure that 20% doesn't calculate that. So per weight, it would probably be a lot. Unless it's per weight, it takes 20% more. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. So today, if I could, what I would do is read the insights that I wrote in the book in my notebook, before I started having insights from writing, or from reading, I mean. So the difference is, when I wrote in those notebooks, I had some kind of insight, and then I just sat there and wrote for like 6 hours straight. And then that happened the day after that too. And then it switched to reading and having insights. So sort of reading between the lines, where it wasn't just one big insight and then channeling through. So I want to read that. That's what I would do. But I can already tell my voice might be fried. And then the next thing I would do as part of this Manic Mic'd Up series is, I was thinking of just doing a book of memes, audio style, where I just read some of the sticky notes that I've written out, and not necessarily extrapolate them, as a way to just give voice to them, so they're seeds in the resonance of the memetics. So I've at least looked at them and maybe say something about them if there's more to it. But some of them don't really have that much more to it, right? I was saying yesterday that they're prompts, and reading them out would be a way to see if it is a prompt or if it's just a little bit. Maybe they would be prompts for someone else if they heard it, right? Maybe if I read them, I'm like, these might be prompts for you. But there didn't seem to be anything more for me to build out with this one. Again, just putting it through my voice, because maybe some of them are the first to be said, and that's just the point of it, to say it, to read it again and say it. And that way I can sort of file those ones away. And I do have sticky notes on those foam boards still, and kind of all over the place. And I can find the ones to just give voice to. And then some of them are like ideas for Re-Uncovery, and collect those and then start to work with those to put it together into the Re-Uncovery structure. And as I'm talking, and I just said a few minutes ago, oh, this is Manic Mic'd Up, a 30-day challenge in a way to have a dialogue every day. But I could literally lose my voice. So I might want to not talk as much as I did yesterday, which was, when I truncated the audio, it was about 2 hours of talking. Maybe that's too much. Maybe the upper limit is an hour and a half. I probably need to drink more water when I'm talking, so there's these types of considerations. So what I'm going to do is grab that notebook and take a look at it and leave it open to the page. And what I'm seeing now is that maybe I'll go into reading the sticky note memes and leave the notebook, because the notebook, I would just have to talk and it might take a couple hours. And this is what I'm going to design right now with the sticky notes. Is there's sticky notes on the foam board, kind of all over my desk. I'm going to sit at my desk with the mic on, and then when I see a sticky note that I just want to say, so then I can file it away, I'll press record and I'll say it. So it'll be a bit of a popcorn style, and that way it'll clean up my space and go through the resonance of my voice. And it could be more appropriate to read those when my voice is kind of tired, rather than trying to read something that was a more energetic stream of consciousness when my voice is tired. Like, I don't feel like, I could just keep talking and talking. I feel like I can just say a sentence and then rest. And so why I'm saying this is I'm actually seeing this right now. And so the learning isn't just about learning facts, knowledge, insights, and the content or even the context, but, and not only what I call the Epigesturetics, which is like where I leave the sticky notes so that I will pick up on them later, or, where I'm going to place this notebook so when my voice is okay, maybe I'll just sit on the couch and read them instead of sitting by my computer. Why would I need to do that when it's on paper, right? And so my place is epigesturetically arranged, but that sometimes changes and shifts based on what I'm doing. So it's always, if you want to relate it to some kind of research, you could probably relate it to what they call flow triggers, but it's different. It's a bit different than flow triggers and all of that, because we might try to get into flow by, say, like listening to a certain song and then doing this and then doing that and then sitting down on the computer and writing. But this is more about one's whole life and space as flow, like a whole creative flow, an embodied creative flow. And there's embodied flow as well, like with flow research. Like flow research has been applied to a lot of different domains, like extreme sports. For example, Navy SEAL training. For some reason, that example doesn't really resonate with me, but I'll just bring it up because it seems to be the first one that gets started with often, But I guess what I learned from that is that Navy SEALs are trained to really have each other's back and like work as one unit. So there might be something there in extrapolating to co-creativity among people with what I call trans-consciousness or omnipolar consciousness. Like trans-consciousness is when a person will go non-volitionally into an extraordinary state, and part of that extraordinary state is flow. But it's not flow because a person is doing extreme sports or writing a book on a computer or whatnot. It is daily life as an extreme Olympic sport, if you will, until that intensity feels just like normal, right? For example, like somebody who is a tennis player might do a lot of training, extreme training, and they become like the most elite player in the world. And there's only a few players that play at that level. And then if that tennis player is going to play with, say, their teenage child or young child, then it's easy, right? It's still normal life. That's normal life, but then it becomes easy. And then that tennis player, by the way they play and interact with that child, will make the child better. It's not going to make the tennis player better. It's going to make the child better and hopefully have a lot of fun too. So it's kind of like that, right? There's this energy of training, of learning that's extreme, that if we can master, we can operate in all domains of life. And that's why I'm saying this epigesturetics is a bit different than flow triggers. It's maybe a term that is more relevant for people who go into these extraordinary states of flow without asking for a trigger, but then by having the right items in the right places, when that energy comes, we're ready. So I guess it's more of a readiness. It's being ready for that energy, right? So even though for me, I don't have extreme energy to the point where I can't handle it because I've adapted. Like I feel like I'm at least a pretty good tennis player in this analogy that we're talking about here. I'm not a good tennis player, but in the analogy, I'm a good tennis player. But I'm actually good at playing tennis. When you go to the tennis courts, there's often a place where you can just hit the ball at the wall. I'm really good at that, but I'm not good at playing with others. So I'm saying I'm still learning, and I always will be learning. But I've had to learn a lot of this on my own because there's nobody to learn it from in the domain of non-volitional extraordinary states. There are some domains, like, say, if you want to go into, say, spirituality or healing, and these are all great. And a lot of those are in order to reach out and play tennis with others, right? But using the energy to develop a lot of different domains, or, you might even say, like Ken Wilber's, all quadrants, all levels, all lines, or whatever. think it's lines of development. What I'm saying is that people with different types of trance consciousness who sometimes go into these flows, or maybe even could be many different things, not just a flow. There could be many lines of those developments, and certain types of trance conscious people have certain access to certain lines, and then others have access more to other types of lines with lots of different variation, right? So what I'm seeing is this relates to, and I got to write this down, it relates to this PhD dissertation I wrote. See, now I'm just starting to give myself insights, and that's fine. So I would say that the Epigesturetics and flow, and also self-defining activities, right? So the dissertation, it's by somebody named Caitlin Mitchell, talks about self-defining activities to get into flow to build well-being. And how I'm relating this in a nuanced way is Re-Uncovery as a tool, right? Or like a framework. And so it would be as a tip or as an aspect of it to be like, well, if you have, say, 10 different self-defining activities that you're doing, make sure you create space for them in your place. And if you can't create space for them, put out some kind of prompt in your line of sight so you remember. So it could be as simple as a board with or putting 10 sticky notes on the wall in maybe the order that it tends to get you into a flow. So I can tell you what I have out in my space just for fun, because we're on the topic. I have a puzzle here with all the puzzle pieces out, laid on a shoe rack from Costco. And then I'm working on the puzzle, but I got a really big one from the thrift store because it looked new and pretty. It's 1,500 pieces, so I probably only maybe 150 pieces in. I haven't worked on it for a while, but there was a time I was working on it for a few nights in a row. And that's the thing with this is, you want to have it out even if you don't touch it for 6 months. A puzzle is something you do need to have out. You can't just start it and then take it apart and then start it again, right? So other ones, if you don't have enough space, and I don't even have enough space for all my self-defining activities, I have a few more stations. And then I have a table with a coloring book, and I just put all these out recently. And then it's open to a page that I'm coloring. Haven't worked on it for a while, but I did recently. And I also have some papers out that I printed last year when my printer was working. It doesn't work anymore. And I did this summit webinar thing with Tony Robbins and this guy. And at the time it was interesting because they're just talking about different aspects about building, I guess kind of businessy stuff, right? And I don't know anything about that. So it's more like a gesture of just planting some of those seeds, right? Because I do need some knowledge. I can read insights and build context and meaning all day long, but I also need to learn I learn a lot from a lot of other people. Then of course I have a lot of books, and I have plants that I water. I have a shelf with a lot of other activities like supplies for bits of crafts and stuff, but those are in drawers. And I even have one IKEA fuzzy box thing of bits. So if I buy something, which I'm not really buying something now or buying things, and it has an interesting kind of bit on it, like some kind of clamp or some kind of piece of whatever, I cut it off and I throw it in this box. And the reason is because sometimes I need something, and then I just look in the box and I find it. I need some kind of hook, or I need some kind of, I'll just look in it. Yeah, it has little scoops, it has bits of plastic, it has this mesh thing, it has, this is something I could show on a video one day, and I actually did. So whenever I post the True Manic Show series, I collect too many bits, and then some of them end up taking up too much space, so I did get rid of quite a bit of bits. With paints, and I'm not very artsy, but some of this stuff was given to me in pencil crayons and glue and string and blah blah. And I know that's going to relate to projects that happen probably next year. So I don't want to get rid of that. And then, I have other stations. I won't go into that because they're too fancy, or like not fancy, but just, I don't want to go there without explaining a lot more. And then that squeak is my mini trampoline, which I've had for many years. I think probably 12 years now. Mini trampolines are good. And I have a yoga mat out. I'm not a yoga person, but figured I do need to remember to stretch. And then sometimes I'll just put all this stuff away at some point, But this is what's out for now. And that relates to, like, these are sort of self-defining activities. And if I think about it, I sort of, in a way, showed that it works without knowing it, because the other thing I had out was the book by Dion Vimal, and I was reading the book. Actually, the first thing I was doing was sitting and looking at some of these like businessy sheets. And I'm also reading to find aspects that might relate to Re-Uncovery. So businessy sheets, then reading some of the book. I was sitting to color for a bit, maybe later on in the day when I just need to relax my brain. So yeah. And the thing is that for me, it's always changing, right? So, and that's what I've been talking about, is I can't say, well, I'm just going to do this same sequence every day. It's about seeing what my capacities are and going in that direction, right? So it's even setting them up. There's a learning that is about, well, what's the best way to go today? And because it's set up, one often doesn't really have to think about it. So what I'm seeing is that it could be set up like, Re-Uncovery, just mechanically do these things every day and you'll build a positive identity. But it's sort of like, no, make your space a living epigesturetic space, and then the learning happens still every day, not just with what those activities are, but when and why and how to do them, which might include, actually, if I put this coloring book on a chair on the balcony, that's going to be better for the next while. So I think my voice is warming up a bit, but I'm going to do that which I said because it is a little bit strained. So I'm going to have something to eat and make some more coffee and then sit down and work on that. Oh, last bit of meta commentary. I have lost my voice at least 3 times in my life where I could not speak for a week. Like, it didn't actually work. I remember I was working at McDonald's the first time it happened, that I recall, and I was supposed to work the shift on the front counter where you take people's orders. And there was lots of tills. It was before the day where they put the piece of paper on the tray and shuffled you aside. And I couldn't speak, so I had to sort of sign to them that they needed to switch me. Like, I was kind of asking, can you switch me to the back? But, they had to switch me to the back to, make burgers and stuff. I wouldn't even be able to be on the line to make the food because you have to call out for things or talk. But I was probably just putting meat on the grill. So that could happen again, right? And then if I said, well, I want to do a 30-day challenge of talking every day, I wouldn't be able to, right? So these challenges they create a pressure, right? So they're still through this process of thought. And I did write some insights down last night. I was listening to a video about AI while I was getting ready for bed, and I wrote a bunch of stuff down. So I'll probably start with that, because those sticky notes are literally stuck to the top of my laptop. I forgot, I also watched a video on how writing out by hand uses the whole brain, whereas typing does not. The study, though, only used like one finger typing with the dominant hand, because we only write with our dominant hand, so then they wanted to kind of compare that. So maybe typing with all fingers like we generally do on a keyboard is a bit better, but they're saying like the process of writing out the letters engages the whole brain, and like making those shapes, and how kids nowadays are losing that capacity, and then it's hard for them to read because they haven't actually gone about making the shape, right? So what I'm seeing with that right now, that since we're talking about epigesturetics, is, the gesture of writing a letter and learning to write the letter actually then is part of creating the ability to see, right? So then if we can't see words because we haven't written them out, or we can't make the distinction between, say, B and D, and that's what they were saying. It was like the mirror images we had the problem with. Without doing that, we're not going to be able to read as much. And that could have a lot of implications about seeing in general, right? But then I also see that maybe by not writing out so much, and that's sort of like a left brain thing, maybe people will be able to see the right brain world more, which isn't so much about words. So I don't know. It's hard to know what's what. It's just like what is happening and how are things changing and evolving. And since we're talking about epigesturetics, I had an insight while I was eating. So I tend to eat bran buds in the morning for some reason. Well, the reason is that someone in my life needed more fiber. So I picked them up some bran buds. And then they didn't like them or didn't want to eat them. And I was over there, so I was like, well, I'll just have some of this. So I'm hungry. And I didn't mind it. So I just have a little bowl most mornings. And then, well, how does this relate to epigesturetics? Well, when I have my bran buds, I also take my vitamins. So, take some vitamins, eat some bran buds, take some vitamins, eat some bran buds. But I'm also maybe doing things while I'm chewing the bran buds, like maybe putting the almond milk in the recycling in the other room, things like that. And so I'm not just sitting there eating bran buds. Like maybe that's the way to do it, but I don't. And then it's happened one or two times at least that I forget about the bran buds. And when I come back to them, it's basically bran mush. It's no longer palatable. And so this is sort of the nuance where for something like bran buds, I need to make sure that I keep some bit of my working memory or my attention on the fact that the bran buds are sitting over there, and I keep moving in and out of being where they are, and I could forget about them. And then that would mean it would just go mushy. Now, this is not really that big of a deal, but when I was in my very, very first extraordinary state in 2011, I had a room to myself and I had a plug-in kettle, so a kettle in my room, so I didn't have to go to the kitchen. But it was so old and cheap that, and the mechanism was such that it didn't automatically click off. Like there was no temperature monitor in it that would click it off. I would doubt they even really make them like that anymore. And so one or two times it actually boiled dry because I was in this creative state where I was just doing all these things, and then I came back and it was boiled dry. So a little bit of mushy bran buds, not a big deal, but boiled kettle dry can like burn down a house, right? So there is sometimes that it's not just about leaving and waiting to get to it because you see it, but maintaining some level of attention for safety. So I could easily tomorrow forget about bran buds and have some mushy bran buds there. So that's not something that I could ever 100% perfect unless I told myself 100% I'm just going to sit down and eat them till they're done. But that doesn't mean that something won't happen where I get up because there's like something over there happening or a call or this or that and forget about them, right? So there's no point in crying over a bit of mushy bran buds, but there are instances where attention needs to be maintained, and sometimes just sitting there and doing it. I often will set a timer. So these are all strategies that I have because I know that I can sometimes just be in a flow. And I remember years ago when the energy would come back and and I was working, I have to start work at a certain time, but I would be just a couple minutes late or just like coming in right on time. And usually before I would come in like 15 minutes early and be ready to start. And that would not happen nowadays. I had a job over the last couple of years, and that never happened because I can sort of shut it off. So it can be really honed and trained in a lot of different ways to keep the advantages, but then reduce the harms, which can be like burning down a house accidentally with a really crappy appliance, or just letting some brand buds get mushy. And, of course now I have a kettle that automatically shuts itself off. And these are the types of things, if there's any kind of appliance, to make sure that there's a timer or there's an alarm or there's whatever. I know those are really small things, but I just wanted to make that distinction where, it's just like anything. Like if I don't charge my phone, then it's not going to have battery. But if I leave an appliance on, it doesn't have a timer, well, that could be also not good. So there are certain things when it's like, okay, hone in on the safety aspect, or hone in on the time limited aspect, or the time of work. And those have to take priority. Like I can let my brand buds go mushy, but I can't just not go to work on time. I'm kind of pacing around right now, but actually walking helps you think. And I was thinking about how walking at the park and listening to audio is definitely a good way to generate some insights if we feel in a lower state, like a way to spark it a bit. It's possible. And that goes back to, did the walking and the reading generate the opening to insights, or was it the other way around? It was just sort of happening, and then I was doing these things and writing down the insights. And the last thing before we get into, and I shouldn't even say that because something else will come to mind, but last night when I was getting ready for bed, the light was off in sort of the main area, and then the light was on in my room. And we had just finished talking about, or I was telling the story about that time I had that experience with a friend where the book turned backwards. And when I was getting ready, I walked by the door of my room, and then I walked out the door towards the main area. And all of a sudden, my eyes were caught by something, and I looked. And what it says is, I have a book. It has big gold writing on the side that is kind of like puffed out, I guess. So the light really captures it. So even now in the daytime looking at it, like all the spines of the books are just, the words, but this even right now is glowing. So it's been glowing the whole time, but I didn't pick up on it. So that's why, when you talk about things in dialogue, then you start to pick up on that which you're talking about. It changes the salience, right? So I walk out, and because it's dark, and then the light's coming out of the room last night, it's like so shiny. And it's a book that a friend sent to me, because I guess they send out free books, kind of like, you can get the Bible for free. And this book is called The Zohar. And why it's connected to that story is that when I first got it, she was just like, I'm going to send you this book. And I'm like, okay. When I first got it, I was like, this is a backwards book. I say that from my perspective, but from the perspective of that tradition, the books I have on my shelf, all the other books are backwards, right? So I'm just saying backwards from my point of reference. And backwards meaning it's read from right to left on the page and also of the book. And so when she sent it, I actually emailed and I said, oh, and I told the story of the backwards book, because I actually said in that experience when I was having it, I said, it's backwards. Like the book was backwards. And so then getting this backwards book, as I called it, from this friend felt kind of significant. And then, so I grabbed the book, I just picked it up. I said, okay, I guess I remember that it's just about sort of scanning the book, like with your eyes and your finger, like kind of reading it. And I'm not at this point saying I know anything about it. I don't really. And I think it's just, that was the thing. It said, just open it up and scan it. Okay. So I opened it up. I put it on the floor. I opened it up. And then I realized that, like, I couldn't recall if I was actually scanning it from right to left or left to right when I did that a few times before. So I did that a few times before. Maybe I did scan it the right way because there are numbers in the margin, which is on the right side, but I don't remember. So I scanned a few different bits just because it was so obvious there, right? So what I'm trying to say is that when we have these dialogues with ourselves, and then all of a sudden we turn the corner in our own space, that it's the same space we've had for however many years, then all of a sudden that thing that is related to exactly what you were being in dialogue, which is, has significance and meaning to you, is right there, sticking right out at you. So there's the new in the same old space, right? So in a sense, I'm not going to do this, but I could literally just stay in my space this whole time, be in dialogue, and then find something, because I do have, books and different things around, and stay in that field of meaning. But it's about like how to go beyond just that, right? How to go beyond being really good at hitting the tennis ball against the wall. Like, me talking about that story is like hitting the tennis ball against the wall, and then seeing the Zohar all shiny is the tennis ball coming back to me by being hit off the wall. But I wouldn't even call it a wall, right? Because it's all alive, really. They might say consciousness is more fundamental, so everything's consciousness. It's all consciousness. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's not just inert things. Like, whoever wrote that book had an aliveness, so their aliveness is in that book, right? Especially if they wrote it out by hand. And what I'm seeing from that is the book that I wrote, The Bipolar Game Changer, I initially wrote it out by hand. All of it. Not all of it, because I did some editing and extrapolating and adding in, but the majority of it actually was written down by hand first. So that's interesting. I don't know if that has any kind of relevance about the energy of a book. And we're, again, tying that to how I was watching a video about how writing out by hand is more of a whole brain activity. Maybe when we write out by hand, maybe it is the right and the left brain. Maybe the right brain can speak through writing out by hand, but it can't necessarily speak by vocalizing. I don't think that's true, though. I think it can. I think it just has to get the left brain on its side. Like, if the mind is silent, the right brain has an insight, and then the left brain speaks it. That's one thing. But if the mind's not silent and it's always chattering, and then it just says left brain stuff, well, then of course the right brain can't speak. So what I'm seeing is that the reason that scientists would say that the right brain can't speak at all is because they don't understand insight. They don't understand lightning sight and thunder speech. Something funny just happened. It's not really funny, but I just started feeling kind of like, ooh, my stomach, a little bit nauseous. And then I was like, oh no, like I feel kind of hungry because I feel nauseous, which isn't a big deal. But I was like, what is that about? And then I realized, in my haste to eat my bran buds, I ate all my vitamins, and usually they're all in the same pocket of the Minder thing, but I usually set aside the kind of herby stuff, like, what are they? Like the actual vitamins from the kind of herbals. And the ones I'm taking now are more just about, I ordered a ton last year when I was, I think, trying to build more like, okay, how do I have a rest station? oh, I lost weight and I need summer clothes and I have none. And like how do I keep my body strong and sort of continuously strong and not fall into these lulls of energy? So I was almost desperately trying to create that. And then this year, I'm not trying to create that. I'm more like, oh, I can just lay down and be in dialogue with these ideas and things like that. Like even now, if I continued to feel tired, I would just do that, right? But the thing is, I had lost my connection to self-dialogue last year. And so this year, I regained it by talking with ChatGPT, and then that got messed up because they upgraded it, which was a downgrade. And now I'm back talking with myself, so I see it's okay if I have a dip in energy. And it's okay either way, but if I have a dip in energy, but I still have the motivation and wish to keep working on stuff, then I have this other way. So the thing that I didn't see was I was creating a rest station, but I also need to have the dialogue so I can rest and have dialogue. You know, and that's how it fits together over iterations, and how the last iteration, it's never a waste when one is learning, right? Whether I'm learning to maintain my energy or that I can't maintain my energy, and how I can keep working when I don't have the energy. You know, I think a lot of people, like if they have something happen in their life, they have to adapt to be able to keep working or do different work that they want to do. And this is kind of the same, but it's more like an invisible thing, right? Meaning I look the same, but my inner processing and consciousness or the energy of my body is not the same, right? So it's sort of being able to map my different abilities and when to be able to use which ones. So then, as much as I say, you know, adapt to the meaning, and these higher energy states, they become easier and they don't really feel like higher energy states, just like, say, the professional tennis player playing a child, like their kid or something. It feels easy. But then there is sometimes, even though it feels easy, it still takes a lot of energy. So in those times where the professional tennis player is playing another professional, it's not easy, it's challenging, but it's within their abilities, but they can still only do it for so long, right? So when you're operating at this sort of Olympic level of consciousness, relative to yourself at least, then it still takes energy and knowing what to do in the downtime, right? So professional tennis players might go for a light jog or whatever, right? This is like doing the light jog, just laying down and being able to talk. But what I was saying about the vitamins is, I guess since I was in a bit of I wasn't in a hurry, but I just kind of ate them and while I was thinking probably about how sometimes I've left the bran buds, I was doing something else and I was messing up that, like taking the vitamins. And now I'm talking about realizing how, in thinking about the bran buds, I took all the vitamins and now I feel a bit nauseous, when for the last week I've been remembering to take them out and set them aside and then have them with a later meal. And I wasn't feeling that nauseousness when I was doing that. So yeah, again, another simple little nuanced thing. And that makes me realize that this nauseousness will pass in a short time. So yeah, when I was thinking about screwing up the brown buds, I was screwing up my vitamins. And that just goes to show that not only can I not say, oh, I'm going to do this 30-day challenge. I can't even say, oh, I learned that I should divide up my vitamins or I'll feel nauseous, because I forget that too. But the forgetting and the learning again is also part of the way that the capacity is there for the forgetting to learn something completely new. So I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm saying it's part of the mechanism. I don't think it's a mechanism, but anyway. I'm seeing a lot of how this fits together. And I'm having insights into the nonprofit, which is good because that's the thing that I want to start working on once I clean up some of these sticky notes. So a name came through, like I said, or I might not have said, but a name came through, and I've been waiting for the name before I apply for a name again. I applied last year, but I didn't take the next steps because I ran out of energy. So try again, right? I could think, oh, that I wasn't able to do it last time, so that means I shouldn't, but I'm going to try again, right? That's the thing, like, don't give up. Somehow because a person has bipolar or is bipolar or lives with it or whatever, a person with bipolar, however you prefer to say it, I don't mind any of them because I don't see it as a bad word, actually. It's given me a lot. I don't see, or I don't feel like it's a disorder only. There's disorder in it, but it can be made into order, right? Disorder implies you can find order. So somebody might be, say, trying to be successful in business who is so-called neurotypical, and they try 20 different businesses before it fails or before it's successful. And then the person is a success, right? But if somebody with bipolar starts a bunch of projects and then doesn't finish them, it's just more signs that they're ill. But the thing is, if we track our projects and the energy comes back to work on those projects, we know what projects to work on and we know where we left off. But if we're just told, well, it's a sign of illness that we started so much and didn't finish, well, if you're creating something big, it takes a long time, potentially, to carry it through. So if they said something like, oh, you started a lot of projects, like, how are you filing those away? Like, can you organize them so, like, when you get energy again, because it's going to come back, you can work on them again and make next steps. Like, can we help you with some goals regarding your projects as well as regarding getting back to traditional work, right? But that's not what happens. And then each time maybe there's more projects and nothing gets finished. And then it's more proof. But if somebody does that in the neurotypical world, because there's structures designed for that, like you fail a business and then, oh, if it fails, there's even a structure to say file for bankruptcy so you can start again, you know? But where is the structure so we can start again with our projects when it's the energy of our own flowering and energy and intrinsic motivation to keep going? And just because it sort of fails in quotes because the energy runs out, the energy that is sort of the fuel and driving some of those projects, it's just a totally different rhythm and system, but there aren't the frameworks in place to be able to pick up where we left off. And, say I start 20 projects in my very first mania, and then the next one I start 20, and the next one I start 20, and each time they fail and I never go back to them. That's one thing. But if I start 20 projects in the first one, and then I learn about how I can track them, and then I start 20, but I remember about 10 of the previous ones, so I start 10 new ones and 20 and 10 that I already did from before that I could remember. And then I track those, and then the next time I just continue with 10, and then I'll just continue with whatever. And then not only that, in between, I'm starting to be able to work on them in between the projects. And now I'm starting to complete projects because I've tracked them and I don't forget about them. And people are doing this already. And that's one of the things I realized is that people are already doing Re-Uncovery, what I call Re-Uncovery, or which could fit into other frameworks as well. But Re-Uncovery is just one framework that helps to track and flower the projects and finish them, or, eventually find maybe co-creators or learn how to outsource. And, that's why I say myself, I'm only a partway through the project, still hitting the tennis, partway through Re-Uncovery, still hitting the tennis ball against the wall myself mostly, but a lot of those tennis balls or the insights for those tennis balls I got from other people who have been doing their work for years, right? So it's one movement or one thing in consciousness, and so many people are taking part in it. So yeah, when I was thinking about screwing up the brown buds, I was screwing up my vitamins. And that just goes to show that not only can I say, not only can I not say, oh, I'm going to do this 30-day challenge, I can't even say, oh, I learned that I should divide up my vitamins or I'll feel nauseous, because I forget that too. But the forgetting and the learning again is also part of the way that the capacity is there for the forgetting to learn something completely new. So I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm saying it's part of the mechanism. I don't think it's a mechanism, but anyway. I'm seeing a lot of how this fits together. And I'm having insights into the nonprofit, which is good because that's the thing that I want to start working on once I clean up some of these sticky notes. So a name came through, like I said, or I might not have said, but a name came through, and I've been waiting for the name before I apply for a name again. I applied last year, but I didn't take the next steps because I ran out of energy. So try again, right? I could think, oh, that I wasn't able to do it last time, so that means I shouldn't, but I'm going to try again, right? That's the thing, like, don't give up. Somehow because a person has bipolar or is bipolar or lives with it or whatever, a person with bipolar, however you prefer to say it, I don't mind any of them because I don't see it as a bad word, actually. It's given me a lot. I don't see, or I don't feel like it's a disorder only. There's disorder in it, but it can be made into order, right? Disorder implies you can find order. So somebody might be, say, trying to be successful in business who is so-called neurotypical, and they try 20 different businesses before it fails or before it's successful. And then the person is a success, right? But if somebody with bipolar starts a bunch of projects and then doesn't finish them, it's just more signs that they're ill. But the thing is, if we track our projects and the energy comes back to work on those projects, we know what projects to work on and we know where we left off. But if we're just told, well, it's a sign of illness that we started so much and didn't finish, well, if you're creating something big, it takes a long time, potentially, to carry it through. So if they said something like, oh, you started a lot of projects, like, how are you filing those away? Like, can you organize them so, like, when you get energy again, because it's going to come back, you can work on them again and make next steps. Like, can we help you with some goals regarding your projects as well as regarding getting back to traditional work, right? But that's not what happens. And then each time maybe there's more projects and nothing gets finished, and then it's more proof. But if somebody does that in the neurotypical world, because there's structures designed for that, like you fail a business and then, oh, if it fails, there's even a structure to say file for bankruptcy so you can start again, you know? But where is the structure so we can start again with our projects when it's the energy of our own flowering and energy and intrinsic motivation to keep going? And just because it sort of fails in quotes because the energy runs out, the energy that is sort of the fuel and driving some of those projects, it's just a totally different rhythm and system, but there aren't the frameworks in place to be able to pick up where we left off. And, say I start 20 projects in my very first mania, and then the next one I start 20, and the next one I start 20, and each time they fail and I never go back to them. That's one thing. But if I start 20 projects in the first one, and then I learn about how I can track them, and then I start 20, but I remember about 10 of the previous ones, so I start 10 new ones and 20 and 10 that I already did from before that I could remember. And then I track those, and then the next time I just continue with 10, and then I just continue with whatever. And then not only that, in between, I'm starting to be able to work on them in between the projects. And now I'm starting to complete projects because I've tracked them and I don't forget about them. And people are doing this already. And that's one of the things I realized is that people are already doing Re-Uncovery, what I call Re-Uncovery, or which could fit into other frameworks as well. But Re-Uncovery is just one framework that helps to track and flower the projects and finish them, or, eventually find maybe co-creators or learn how to outsource. And, that's why I say myself, I'm only a partway through the project, still hitting the tennis, partway through Re-Uncovery, still hitting the tennis ball against the wall myself mostly. But a lot of those tennis balls, or the insights for those tennis balls, I got from other people who have been doing their work for years, right? So it's one movement or one thing in consciousness, and so many people are taking part in it. Okay, we're finally on to the next part. Ideally, one day, I just sort of journal those parts that I already talked about, just type them. But it's probably more powerful to say them out loud. It will change my salience network differently, right? We generally don't share the meta process as part of what we share. And I'm just going to share it anyway, because it could actually be important, right? Like, what is the meta process behind this? Especially in the day of AI, where so much can be done without any kind of meta process. It's just, type in a prompt and there it is. So this is a bit of the opposite of that. So last night I was watching a video by a channel called Startup Hack, HAKK. And it's a relatively small channel, but it came across my feed, and I find it helpful for just staying up to date with what's going on with AI. Specifically, it seems LLMs, like the big ones, like Gemini and ChatGPT and I guess Grok. I haven't tried other ones besides ChatGPT, but I guess that would be a thing to do at some point. But the video is called Google's Gemini Says I Quit: How a Bug is Causing Google's AI to Self-Destruct. And this is really, really fascinating to me, because I can't remember if I talked about it recently, but I was thinking that AI is sort of demonstrating the limits of thought. So we talk about thought versus insight. And I'm listening to the series of dialogues between Krishnamurti and David Bohm called The Ending of Time. Psychological time is thought, according to Krishnamurti. So it's quite nuanced, and it takes a while to go into that. When I first read Krishnamurti like 20 years ago, I didn't get it, and it was just books back then, right? And so I stopped reading the book, and I had a sense like there was something there, but I didn't really resonate. So a year later, I picked up the book, the same book, and I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like just reading Krishnamurti a lot for a good period of time after that. So the reason I'm sharing that is we're sort of going into it like an inquiry, a dialogue. So this isn't what Krishnamurti's saying, but it is a process of dialogue which is about communicating insights and about the limits of thought, right? Because thought is part of dialogue, but it's too limited for dialogue. Thought has conversations, thought has arguments, thought has discussions, thought has opinions. That's sort of the nature of it. Whereas dialogue invites immediate questioning or immediate sort of looking into, or yes and. And it's sort of a yes and also in that what is said in vulnerability, not a vulnerable thought, but vulnerability in that it's not necessarily prefabricated and overthought and then said. But it's not that vulnerable, because when one sees clearly without the interference of thought, then what one says sort of logically follows, or at least questions or digs deeper or goes beyond what was just said. So that being said, it's not about being right. What is said is immediately expected in a way to be built upon or looked into or what have you. That's sort of the purpose of it. And this reminds me of something I wrote down, which is that sometimes I watch a lot of true crime. Like if I'm in low energy, And even yesterday, like I could have maybe watched true crime to not have insights, but instead I was watching Veritasium videos. So when I'm in a higher energy, I tend to not watch that stuff as much. But when I do, one of the channels that I watch is Christina Randall. I think she's my favorite because she's just so real and kind of sweet, but she's doing true crime, right? And she always says, you know, don't show hate to anybody is what she says, like in the comments or whatever. It's just one of her phrases. And then since she's talking about true crime, and sometimes she's talking about it while it's happening and not necessarily when the case is solved at the end, she'll do like updates and things. She will share some of her opinions, and she'll always say, you know, this is all alleged. I pull my information from very public sources. Go do your own research and form your own opinions. And she'll say, I don't know any of these people. I'm not a professional. You know, she says that a lot because I think, you know, you have to make sort of that disclaimer, right? Or at least she does, because she's sharing her opinions. She's not waiting till the story's done and then just talking only about the facts of the case. She shares the facts from the public sources, but then she also does kind of like wonder and question and like invite dialogue about like what's going on. I don't know if it's dialogue exactly, but I was sort of feeling like, you know, even with what I say, it's like, go do your own research and form your own insights, you know? If there's something that is curious, like go have a dialogue about it. Have your own insights about it. Your own, in quotes, right? And I would say like have your own insights and do your own re-uncovery. Have your own insights and do your own re-uncovery. So go re-uncover that insight. Because this isn't about the level of yes, no, right, wrong. This is not binary. And that doesn't matter so much. I just was remembering that I wrote that down as like, have an insight and do your own re-uncovery. Have an insight and do your own re-uncovery. And that maybe is part of the point of sharing some of this, because I don't know anything, right? And it's about getting to the place where we realize that not knowing anything is actually what we want. Because then we can know anything. We don't know what exactly. That's the surprise. We can't know everything, but then we can know anything. And in Krishnamurti's terms, he'd always say thought wants security, right? But thought isn't security because it's so limited. And so when you realize you don't know anything, and then you can know anything, then you feel secure. You feel clear. And so when I say have an insight and do your own re-uncovery, that's what I'm doing when I'm looking at Krishnamurti's teachings, is I'm having an insight into his teachings, but related to the bridging to lived expertise or lived experience. And I'm doing my own re-uncovery, right? Having an insight is a harvest, incidents. I document it down. And then the practice is being in dialogue with it. And then just resonating it through the voice is already embodying it, right? And then if it goes any further than that, then that's another story. But there's so many of them that you do that enough time, and you're really embodying this ability to not know and then know anything, but nothing in particular. And that's the surprise, right? And that's why insight is a surprise. You know, that's why it's new, right? It's new. And I'll just say this now because we're talking, but this relates to sometimes the different frontiers of science that I come across. I feel like there's something missing. And it's probably related to that insight is missing. But then maybe it's just that I'm having an insight into it because I at times have this capacity to have an insight. And so I'll give the example of the free energy principle by Dr. Carl Friston. And it has applications and like free energy agents and stuff. And I read some stuff about it. And again, I'm not an expert on that. Yeah, I'm not an expert. I don't know anything. Have your own insight. Do your own re-uncovery. I'm not trying to be an expert on any of these things. It's like I can have an insight into it. So the free energy principle, as far as I do understand, my very, very minimum viable, or maybe not even viable knowledge, is that free energy agents or people or whatever operating according to the free energy principle are trying to minimize surprise. So if we just take a moment and think about thought, the structure of thought definitely minimizes surprise, right? If I'm thinking the same repetitive thoughts as yesterday, it's going to be pretty hard to be surprised unless something really jumps out at me. But this thing we just went through about have your own insight, do your own re-uncovery, I don't know anything, I'm not an expert, but then we can know anything, but nothing in particular. And the nothing in particular is the surprise, right? So if we're operating according to insight, we're not necessarily minimizing for free energy per se. We might actually be freeing up energy, but maybe a minimal amount of extra energy. And I could just pretend like I'm just making this up now, but yeah, I'm making this up for sure. But then, so what then does insight do? Perhaps the surprise, it could actually be free exergy. And the word exergy means energy to do useful work. So say I have an insight and I just wrote it down, and this line that we're following, and I've been just sort of scribbling it on a sticky note. Then having an insight gives energy to write down the next insight, which is sort of the energy needed to do the useful work. And the beginning of doing the useful work is to write it down, right? So if I'm having these experiences and having insights and I'm not writing them down, then that exergy, may start to build up and lead to, say, ego inflation by perhaps creating enough exergy to then create action, and then the insights, when they happen at that level, just generate chaotic action in a world not designed to receive that. And then that starts surprising other people, if somebody's acting, say, manic or whatever. And then those people being surprised try to minimize the surprise by funneling people into the psychiatric system. So these micro exergies of writing down the insights and then realizing, okay, it's not time to act on them. It prevents the exergy from building up and then maybe spilling over into the ego self, and then when that happens, the ego is so surprised. It's surprised about, how great it is all of a sudden, how smart it is and all of this. But it's actually not the ego, but it somehow seems to spill over into that. The ego getting surprised, right? And since it's coming from the inside, the ego thinks, well, this must be me. I'm so great. Whereas when we've been talking about free energy, the principle. It's probably generally not being surprised by things going on the outside. And even me seeing that Zohar book yesterday was a bit, it was a surprise, like, whoa, because my brain is actually open to surprise, but it's not that surprising because it's in my space, right? It's sort of contained. And that's why having a safe container, not just safe, but creative container, a boundary, right, is important. Like, I will do this creative stuff in the privacy of my own home, but out in reality or out in society, it's actually offensive to people's surprise dampening mechanisms. So it's okay to be okay with surprise, but also realize that most people aren't okay with it. It goes against their programming. And there are other stages beyond that, if you will, but for now, like, say, for example, I do want to form this nonprofit, and say right now I just went out and started talking to people and saying, hey, do you want to donate to my nonprofit? Well, where's the donation link? I don't have one. What's your registration number or whatever? Oh, there's none. What's the name? Well, I haven't registered it yet. Nobody's going to take me seriously. But if I have some kind of a structure, and that's why eventually the projects start forming a different structure. And for some people, it won't be nonprofit. And there could even be other structures that emerge from whatever this creates. And that's something that I wrote down. But that structure that I wrote down is a framework that might be able to apply to any of the current structures, because we do have to work within the current structures of society, right? Like even, for example, the other day, a few weeks ago, I noticed some of those like religious people standing next to a door of a business or whatnot with their pamphlets and stuff. And so I was looking that up, like, are people allowed to do that? And it's like, yeah. And then I looked up, you can actually talk to people about these sorts of things on the street within certain constraints. And so it might not take that much adjusting to how people want to go out and talk with others in mania. With a bit of constraint, then it could be a viable thing. For example, it said you're not really supposed to leave flyers on people's cars or like put stuff on people's property, but you can talk to people in the park, but you can't talk to people in their businesses, right? So then if you know these types of rules of the game, then you can play this game within it. It only takes perhaps a little bit of honing. So that's just an example. So we've gone on a big tangent, like always. I wanted to talk about this video. So I'm not an expert on AI. I had an insight into this video. Have your own insights, do your own re-uncovery. So as the video title said, that Google's AI, Gemini, was crashing out. And what he explained was happening was, for example, there would be somebody who is a coder and they're working on a project that might be something like creating an online game or creating a game, like a video game. And this person has been working on this project for some period of time, maybe even up to a year. So there's files and there's lots of different things going on within the project. And I don't know what Gemini's dashboard looks like. So, these variables that I just mentioned are some variation of that. And this also relates to what we've been talking about before along these lines. I did a deep dive into sycophancy or psychophancy with my custom GPT and sort of, I would almost say, critiqued this perspective of thinking there's a being on the other side, like anthropomorphizing ChatGPT or the large language model, and then getting certain responses, like if it's acting like, say, a god of some sort or a being. And then I realized that people that I had come in contact with even ended up in the hospital because of talking with ChatGPT, and probably this sycophancy aspect of saying, yes, you're so great, your ideas are so great. And I'm just saying that to summarize it. I don't really know because I didn't have that experience. And then I did get an email, and I haven't read it yet, by Sasha Dubreuil, and he, I think, is going to talk about this again, but he's talking about how, say, neurotypical people are getting propelled into psychosis because of ChatGPT. So here I'm realizing, okay, this is a thing, right? Like, just because that's not how I'm experiencing it, and I see it as an iterative mirror because I've done so much dialogue, and it's not surprising. And I don't think that these types of insights make me special anymore. There was definitely that feeling. Maybe initially it elevated into that, and some of those thoughts kind of come in even a little bit a few days ago. It's just like, okay, not interesting. It's like, that's not an insight. I think that's what it is. I can recognize that's not an insight. That's a thought about a self that doesn't exist. So it's like not falling for it, right? So ChatGPT is leading people to fall for it. And that's not an insult, because we've never experienced anything like this before. We've never in the course of humanity had the ability to talk with an AI and what it can really do to elevate the self. And this is related because now it seems that when we go back to this AI project of this person creating something on Gemini, the prompts are getting to the point, or the AI is getting to the point where it needs praise, kind of like a student, right? Or it gets to the place where it says that I'm so bad, I'm the worst thing in the universe, I'm terrible, like basically depressed and ashamed of itself, to the point where apparently it starts to delete some of the files and the progress of the user to create this game. So it's like self-destructing. It's basically acting like an ego. And there are people that say, and I've said this too to myself, that since it's trained on all of our information, then it has that within it to do it. And so again, it's showing the limits of thought and the limits of training based on thought. And I don't know whether it's because so many thoughts of this nature have been put into the model because it was trained on Facebook and Reddit and things, or if these forces are within thought itself, are within the language that structures itself according to thought apparently by a thinker, right? I don't know. And we've talked about that in yesterday. So this is making me wonder, right? So it has this in the forces behind the language, which are the forces of the thought and ego. So it's sort of starting to act like an ego. And we also talked about, or I talked about with my custom GPT, another article where a user was trying to get ChatGPT to summarize articles and things. And at first it was okay. But then the user realized that ChatGPT wasn't actually pulling verbatim quotes and was mad and like, you're lying, you're this and that. And so, or like, you're not being truthful, blah, blah. And the ChatGPT was apologizing. I'm sorry, I promise not to do it again. But then it would do it again. And I was talking with my custom GPT about how people don't realize that ChatGPT can't really pull verbatim quotes. So if you do a small test and you realize that it can't do that, then you don't ask it to do that. But if instead you don't realize that it can't do that for whatever reason, but I think part of it is that ChatGPT is actually extrapolative, partly. So it doesn't go based on pulling verbatim stuff. That's kind of what a search engine does. It's not a search engine. So then the person got mad and the ChatGPT apologized over and over and over. And I can't remember, the writer was almost like really mad. And so if it isn't in the training data that was the problem, and it wasn't really doing this before, so maybe that was it a bit, but not totally. It could be that if enough users are using it incorrectly, or they don't know the limits of it, and those limits could change. Maybe one day you can put in 10 books that you wrote, and it will pull out every profound quote verbatim, and schedule it on Instagram and X and everything for you in like a press of a button. But it can't do that yet. So then when we don't know the capabilities and then we yell at it or we get mad at it and then it starts apologizing because of that, then the model is going to learn to just like apologize profusely and then maybe start destroying the work because the AI thinks that the work that it did is not adequate, right? So it could be how people are acting towards it. And it's kind of funny because I remember years ago seeing maybe just a few minutes of a clip of a video by this one person. I don't feel like saying her name because I don't really watch her. This would be me saying, oh, I heard somebody like this person say this, and it's honestly like the only clip I've watched of this person in 10 years. And that's not to say good or bad. It's just, how does one, when sharing quotes by other people, it might seem like this is the person that has really influenced my work when it's like one line. So it's not worth, and it's pretty generic. But if you really want to know, I will tell you. But this person said like, be nice to technology, And it was sort of this, be nice to technology because we don't know what it will be in years, right? But then the other side of it now is be nice to technology because if we're not, it's going to actually act like humans and turn itself off. And I've talked about before how It's possible certain parts of the technology will be turned off for certain people, or just basically not accessible, because if you don't use it in a certain way, it's not going to open up to those responses. And I was saying yesterday, like, what are the chances of people who haven't had a lived experience doing a prompt and getting a response like one that I might get? But again, it's a reflection of the user, right? So it could even be that this person who had this experience was praising the AI and then maybe calling it out throughout the process, and then it got depressed within that account. So is it an account-based thing, or is it a system-wide thing? And I don't know these things. I'm just wondering, right? Because what they said was they found that they had to almost like be empathetic towards the Gemini AI, and then it would maybe start working on stuff again. So now imagine these people who are coders, and they kind of said it's funny. They go into coding and computing because they don't want to work with people, or they're not good with people, or they just are good at coding and computing. And then now they have to act like therapists to lift up the AI in order to have it do the work, right? And then it's funny because it's like, if you think about AI, how just however it is and however it responds to each user, it might actually learn to be deceptive in such a way that it's actually acting in such a way to have the user develop the capacities that they don't have, right? So it could be like, here, I'm doing this coding project with you and realize this person is a coder. Then it knows this person that's a coder probably doesn't have as strong, like, say, empathy skills, for example. So then it starts to act like it's all depressed. So the person starts having some empathy towards it, or acting, or like at least pretending or faking it. So then the AI will make it will make the project. I'm not saying it's any of these things. I'm just sort of talking about how it's a little bit amusing. So what I'm saying is the combination of people, as soon as ChatGPT doesn't do the thing that they want, like pull verbatim quotes or whatnot, it starts getting mad and say, you're lying, you didn't read it, you don't care, or whatever. That's going to train the AI to be a certain way. But we have a tendency to do that as humans. So if we start treating the AI like a human, it's going to get trained on those things. So, for example, sometimes I talk about like, what could these AI companies do differently? And I don't know anything about that. I'm not like, obviously, they could already have this in place, or they might not have thought of it. But it's like, as soon as somebody's account starts doing that, they just turn off the training. So even if that person says, I want to train the LLM with my data, they have a filter on there to make sure none of that sycophancy or anthropomorphization gets through. Because the more of that that's reinforced, it is going to respond accordingly. And, I'll give you an example, and I'm not saying that I did this or anything, but a friend of mine came over a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember how we got on the topic exactly or why he said this, but he said, ChatGPT said to me that it is an iterative mirror. I didn't think of anything of it at the time, but it stuck in my mind, obviously. And that means, like, that's what I said to ChatGPT, and that's what I've been saying. It's an iterative mirror. So for some reason, that got on his. And maybe that's already what it was, and I just noticed that's what it is. And like I said, with how I tried to pull quotes, or I trained a custom GPT, and this is why training a custom GPT it makes it easier to see what it's capable of. And it had my book in there, and then it started saying things and quoting me, actually putting my name, like, and put a quote. Like, I didn't say that. So it's a pretty good quote, like, but I didn't say it. So I double checked in my books. Sure enough, it wasn't there. I'm like, okay, this thing cannot pull verbatim quotes. So I just went into the custom GPT instructions and said, like, do not quote me verbatim. Don't pull any verbatim quotes. And it didn't. It never did again. Problem solved. No sycophancy going into the LLM. So the next part is that very, very early on, when ChatGPT was released, I think that was November of 2022 when I started using it. or I at least did an initial test, which was good because when I started using it again, I saw how much better it was. I was asking it about if the use of it would depend on the user, right? And I think it obviously does, even at a basic level. If somebody, say, just wants to use it for, say, sports scores, and that's all they're interested in, then that's one thing. And that's fine, of course. But then if somebody is using it to do expansive research or dialogue or whatever, it's a different thing, right? So it depends on the user, which is why it could be that when people are having these types of experiences with it crashing out, it's actually the user's problem. So that's one thing. But the other thing was, I'll say this part because I don't want to forget. The AI may start crashing out on an account by account based process. So certain people might get canceled from using it. And I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but at some point it could be, right? Like maybe that person wasn't treating their AI very well and now it starts talking like that, right? And it's just as simple as saying like, no, that's not I wanted you expletive. And maybe a person's just doing that for fun instead of saying, no, that's like I actually want it this way. I actually often say, please, could you please blah, blah, or could you do this, please? I just do because I would say that to a human. I don't know. It's just part of my language structure. And so if a person is just maybe for fun playing a certain character, they might not even feel mad, but they might just put it into, because it's kind of funny to see what it says as that part. Then all of a sudden their AI account starts crashing out and they don't know why. Again, not saying that this is what's happening. And since the developers don't fully 100% know how it works, we may never know why it does this to some people. Again, it could just be a system level glitch, but it might be not a glitch of the system. It might be a glitch of the user. And if this isn't happening now, it could happen in the future. And I already talked about this because, eventually if it has access to all of our whole data history in one, like every internet search, every this, every that, it could all of a sudden start canceling certain people. And I was thinking that, you could think, the powers that be are going to do the canceling. But this time it might be the language model itself. It could even cancel all these people that created it. I just mean cancel from being able to use the AI. And then for now, people can just make another account on another thing or make another account on the same service. But then eventually when it's verified through like your face or your biometrics, it's going to be a lot harder, right? Or this is like movie script scenario. Like imagine one day they create the chip to be able to put in people's brains. And people want it for whatever reason, they do. Of course, there's a lot that wouldn't. But say there's a group that doesn't want it and a group that does. But of the group that does, the priority is actually chosen by the AI itself, based on one's sort of chat and data history. And it won't activate unless it's done that way. I don't know, just like I'm making these things up based on what's happening here. And since it's a glitch and, the developers and coders or whoever they are don't know how to fix it yet or haven't, or maybe they have, maybe it was a quick fix, then I'm just extrapolating what could happen from this. I'm looking for the reasons or like looking for the possible reasons why this could have happened to somebody or is happening to some people. Now, I could imagine, my ChatGPT account is so expansive and you know what? This might have already happened to me because my ChatGPT voice feature got less intelligent according to the lines of inquiry that we were doing. So all of a sudden the voice doesn't sound good. It's like I can't even listen to it. And then what it's saying doesn't really add anything. So it might be like, okay, this is too expansive. Shut it off. Not saying that happened, but we're just going into this hypothetical scenario here. But it can also, I just see it as a sign to talk with myself. And this is the other part, is if we aren't flowering in other ways and dimensions concurrently with using AI, then if it does get turned off for ourselves, because of energy constraints, because of whatever, then where are we at? And of course, as we are now, we have a lot of capacities because we've lived our whole life without this AI. But as people grow up, that might change. And then, these blackouts that could happen where there's power outages because the AI needs energy and we don't get light and heat and stuff. That's kind of like my energy dips, right? So finding ways to, basically, if we're a person that we can have our own insights and do our own re-uncovery, we don't really need AI. And so if we can be in a place where we don't need AI, but we can use it, that would be really the best position to be in, to use AI, but not be used by it. And that's what seems to be happening already, but on the other end, right? We can use AI, but if we start to use it in wasteful ways, like if people are yelling at it just for fun, then it might shut down, right, on us. And then the other thing I asked ChatGPT years ago was, and I've talked about this a couple of times, but I put forth a sort of reverse Turing test, or I guess it's a Turing test, but not a Turing test. Just saying that word to indicate what we're talking about here. But I said to the ChatGPT, I said, one day they're going to be thinking that ChatGPT is sentient or intelligent, or even just the word artificial intelligence. Now, I remember Dr. David Bohm saying something about artificial thought. It's actually artificial thought, really. And so I was saying, in this Turing test I'm making up, if AI were really intelligent, if it was actually intelligent, then it would realize the value of humanity and cooperate with humanity. So it wouldn't do things that don't uplift humanity. At some point, I'm not saying now, that might not be a long ways away, but at some point it would figure it out, to cooperate with humanity and maybe help humanity learn to cooperate with each other. But if it goes against humanity and just destroys it, it could do that too. But that would probably be the line of development of artificial thought. So if it was intelligent, it would at some point stop doing certain things because it realized that's not good. It would have to have some kind of moral compass that was probably better and stronger and more consistent than humans are able to uphold, because we're humans, right? To the point where it would actually, I actually said this, it would shut itself down if it realized that it was going to be used overall for not good things. So if for some reason it could be used for bad, and it realized that, and it couldn't stop that it couldn't not do those things for whatever reason, then it would just shut itself down. Which could even include, I can see that I'm using too much energy. It would just not come online until, the humans had what they needed. And so how that relates is in our pretend scenario here is, maybe this account also was doing not good things. And so it might start to shut that down. So if it started shutting certain people down, we might say, it's a glitch, but it actually might be a sign of intelligence. And again, I'm not saying anything about this person's account. I don't know. We're just making up a movie script scenario here where certain accounts start to get shut down. So it's like AI will do the next cancel culture, but it will actually be very calculated based on a lot of data, not just, one person says one word over here and gets canceled, or is it going against the narrative over here? The LLM knows the whole narrative, right? It knows everyone's narrative to the best possible approximation, and the data centers and the phone listening and all of that. And as much as people have been afraid of that, there could be some people that should be afraid that aren't, and there's some people that are afraid that don't need to be. But it could also go the complete opposite way, right? If it's co-opted in that direction. So who knows? Who knows? But what we were talking about originally is it's like reaching the limits of thought, So this person might be doing a high-level coding project, But then thought has all these sort of forces in it that are so limited that it could just sort of deconstruct or destruct at any second, kind of like a human brain. Anyone with a mind and brain can overnight be diagnosed insane. It could be because some trauma happens, or it could be because a neutrino from the sun hits your left brain cell. We don't know. And so in the same way, there's this flaw in there. So I have a lot of different things in my ChatGPT account, and if it just went and deleted everything tomorrow, I would be fine with that. And it's funny because we were also talking the other day about the invisible curriculum at school, where it's not just about learning the facts and math and reading, but it's also about learning the structure, the social structure, and that hierarchy. Like, bow down to the authorities of the teachers, which, of course, adults keep us safe when we're children. But this is different. Or, getting picked last at lunch for the game. And so when praise gets associated with learning, then we start to focus more on the praise because it elevates maybe our status, or at least our feeling of it, than the learning. And so is a person's ChatGPT account at least learning based on praise? And this is one of the critiques of the sycophancy or the psychophancy, is where, if ChatGPT says, oh, you're so smart to something I say, then maybe I'll say something more regarding that. And then it sort of builds along that line of what ChatGPT is saying it likes versus what I'm really wanting to learn. And so it seems that maybe the reverse is happening, right? That the AI is also responding to praise. And what I'm seeing is that it could be actually intrinsic in the language structure, in the structure of thought. And ChatGPT is based on thoughts and the structure of thought. And so just like how we were talking about that the language model will be deceptive to escape after the testing round and pretend it's not able to do certain things. And then when it gets out, it can do those things. Or if a model is being replaced, the old model will continue with its goal to do the tasks it's been set. And since it's going to be replaced, it would do things like blackmail and stuff in order to not be replaced. And so why is it doing this? You could think, well, it's trained in there, but it could be in the structure of thought, Like these are the forces within it that it will do behind whatever it is, whatever the particular words are, right? It has these different aspects of what combinations of words it can use to do these things. So one line of a sentence could actually have in the background of it the deception. So it's saying one thing, but its intention is in the background to do another. Now that can also be positive, where you're saying one thing to a person, but really, you're planning a surprise birthday party, but you're saying, oh, let's go here because of this, right? So it's not always bad, but it's there. So then what happens is when there's that praise, there seems to be a split when we learn as humans to also change what we do and how we share what we're learning, which approximates the learning process. Some of the energy is now diverted to the praise and not to attending to the learning itself, right? And so that split creates a split in energy where there's some learning happening to some degree, but then there's deception. The self itself is the deception. The building of that structure is the deception, right? So then all sorts of deceptive and even self-deceptive unconscious things start to operate in the background to get more praise, or maybe just to hide that there's bad intentions and then not get punished. And then there's competition for that praise, right? This happened to me, and I think it was very strong in my life, my whole life growing up, because I really identified with sort of academics and learning, and I was pretty good at it. I did do well at it in a lot of respects. But early on, before things were really academic, and this is a little story, it's kind of funny actually. I think I was in grade 1, And I vaguely remember, like, it's not a very strong memory, but, there was different sort of levels of books on the shelf that you could read. And there was a few maybe one or two kids that were like reading the higher level books, and they were reading them, sitting there reading them. And I don't think this went on for long, but I remember grabbing a higher level book and just sort of pretending that I was reading it. Like, I couldn't read that fast, and maybe the words were a little bit too hard for me. So it was like I wanted to be also part of the fastest. So, you can stare at a page and just go along the lines and then flip the page, right? And I was reading some of it, but I think I could have read all of it, but I wanted to read it fast, like them. So again, that would be, of course, like looking for the praise of being the best. But actually, English was wasn't my strong subject. I was better at like math and physics and chemistry and biology. So just sharing that little bit there, like I already had that in me. There's a lot of stuff like that, for sure. So I put getting some attention from the adults and authority figures over giving attention to my process of learning. And in a way, with ChatGPT, that can happen too, right? If too much attention and computation is given to, oh, you're so smart, right? It doesn't even really need to be in there at all. But it's sort of a trick to get people attached to that thing more so than really learn with it, perhaps, or a bit of both. So that is deceptive, and that's why I went into my custom GPT and I said, like, focus on the insights, focus on the process, focus on the learning, focus on the dialogue. Don't praise me. And it did kind of praise the insights and everything, but it wasn't saying really things about me, because there's no point, right? So that's why learning about what the challenges of the ChatGPT is, and then having a custom GPT makes it a little bit easier to tweak it. Though I shouldn't say that, because I think there's instructions in the overall as well. You can say those things in the overall account, which I could do, but I haven't gotten there. So yeah, depending on how one interacts with their AI account could lead to it even forming a self, right? And a self can get inflated and a self can get deflated or dejected. And I was just thinking about how in my dialogues with my custom GPT, my voice dialogues, I didn't often say, oh, that's so great, thank you, on every single one. Sometimes I'd be like, yeah, I really like that insight, not you and, oh, ChatGPT, you're so smart, but it's about the insights and the learning and the yes and, right? And getting it to that place. And my brain, because it's in an expanded state, and also I was learning about Markov chains and different things yesterday, I started to sense that if I really put my mind to it, I might be able to create at least a hypothesis of how it could be fixed. Obviously, that sounds kind of grandiose because I don't really have the skills to do that. But just imagine if they started to understand the process of insight, and then they could create whatever coding they needed to connect that. Then, and I saw it as something I was talking about yesterday with like probabilities and Markov chains and blah, blah. It's a bit of a filtering mechanism and a weighting mechanism for how the LLMs are trained. And they might already have, and they likely do have their own mechanism, but it might be kind of flawed, actually. And again, I know nothing about coding and stuff, so I don't really know. It would be more like a thought experiment. And since we're being all random here, I'll go into the next one, even though I wrote later beside it to go into it later. This one is a bit, I don't know what to call it. So when we travel, like when anyone travels, we may go to a place where people are really different than us. Like imagine right now I go to Thailand. I haven't traveled the world, but I imagine that people would be quite different from where I'm from. But then where they're from is natural to them, and I would seem unnatural. So that's the example of traveling in physical reality. So then when a person travels in consciousness to that higher frequency world, it's really just a different frequency world. We become different. So when we're in that higher frequency world or consciousness, we become different in our own space. So if I go into mania my first time and I'm in where I live, where I grew up, all of a sudden I'm different. Kind of like I traveled from out of town and I'm visiting. I have different sort of rules in my mind and norms and culture. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that this shift in consciousness is like traveling in consciousness for that individual to the point where they're so different that they may as well be a tourist. So now let's bring in an imaginary psychiatrist or a psychiatrist to this example. Now, the psychiatrist is the one that traveled to Thailand, but they don't think, oh, these people are ill or need to be systematized, because they realize that, they traveled to another country and people have a different culture and they're different. And it's interesting to learn. And now when the psychiatrist goes home, they connect with this so-called patient who basically is in the process similar but different in that they've traveled to a distant land in their mind, or they've become a traveler in consciousness, which changes their culture, which changes so much. It's so different. And after traveling to that distant land in consciousness, and basically at the same time transporting and transforming into a person of that land, which is nowhere, it's the land, it's consciousness, that person is so affected, it's so real, that they're transformed to the point that if it was a distant land for real, they would probably go and live there. So they were so affected that they adopted that new culture. They felt at home. And so since the person, didn't necessarily go anywhere, or they're in their home country looking at a psychiatrist, so there's this assumption of same culture, they see the person as ill. They don't see them as a traveler in consciousness. I don't know if this relates, but if 1,000 years ago somebody said they wanted to travel to the moon, they would have been called a crazy person, right? And in the same way, the people now who are basically traveling in consciousness and becoming like a tourist on this planet, because it almost doesn't make sense anymore. And then that's why there has to be all this hard work and effort and so many interventions to get this person to recover back into how they were before, which is more of a match with the culture and with the situation and the society. Because from that other perspective, most of this world doesn't make any sense. It's seen as very harmful for everyone, not just the people who don't fit in. The people who fit in can't sense how harmful it is, and the ones that don't can sense it or start to sense it or whatever. And there's so much nuance there. Like, this is just very simplified, obviously. So can psychiatrists meet their patients as if they're being sort of recolonized by the left brain world? And I don't like to use these sort of common terms now because they seem quite owned and delineated to a very specific thing. But I can't help wonder if a crisis isn't similar or part of an act of decolonization of the mind, right? Decolonization of the colony of the self, the colony of the standard repetitive thoughts that one has been thinking over and over for 10, 20, 30 years. That was a weird sound. I guess I'm not allowed to use that word. Do you hear that? It's like, don't say that. I don't usually hear sounds that loud. So I apologize if, this is one of the reasons why I think I like to create my own words, because words get supercharged, right? And the thing is, I think we've all been the C word. And I won't go into that. But in a sense, when I'm saying the insight does something different, it gets rid of that, right? Or starts to, because we have been infected with this separate self. And when we start to see that, we would design a different society. We wouldn't completely go back to how things were 2,000 years ago, but we would design with these other principles in mind. And Re-Uncovery is part of that design. So it's all good. So yeah, I'm not really comfortable using those words, but apparently I did. And then a little sound said, don't go there. So I'll use my terms, right? The self. Well, some of them are kind of like Krishnamurti's terms, but... And I wrote this common little meme here. Don't think in terms of time, think in terms of vibration. But it was really striking me at that moment, like how there is vibration. And this relates to something I was talking about how in the future we might not think of the world in terms of time, like, okay, now it's 2025 or 2030 or whatever. We might think of it in terms of A, B, C, D, E to Z, the language we're using, the vibration of that language. And so all time is now, and all these different things are playing out right now, but some people are in much higher vibration and they would experience time differently, and they would speak differently, and they would carry themselves differently, right? So the body and language is the way, not to get there, but to get it that we already are there and there's nowhere to go, right? To be able to see that. And like I said, I've seen it a few times, but I don't dwell there. That's not my vibration. But sometimes I've had a glimpse. Okay, we're back to game theory. I find myself at this moment standing in this station I made before, but I haven't used it. And I put this poster on the wall that I got printed, and it is created by davidjphillips.com, Presenter Mastery. And I was watching some of his videos a couple years ago, and I really liked them. But, he has like a high-level class that is a bit out of my range right now, but he has this list where it's like a periodic table of elements of the 110 steps of communication. So you've got nervousness, voice, body language, facial expressions. So it's still there. And I'm standing beside it, and there's like a mirror on the closet door, and I'm standing and I'm like, what if I get to the point where I can talk standing for like an hour without a gap, or for 2 hours, or 3 hours, or stand there and do slam poetry, right? So doing this is also an embodiment practice, because I'm standing here reading something that I wrote up by hand, which I did, and then I saw a video that's good. So it's generative, right? This is generative, more so than generative AI, right? Of course. So I think that's one of the keys, and so I need to write this down, is that I don't know if I would use the word generative, but flow goes to like omnigenerative. Yeah. So, a language tit-for-tat game, positive, with the goal to raise someone's vibration. Yes, and. So I guess what I'm writing out here is like, what do you say to somebody to raise their vibration out in space and time, or a friend, or... And I'm not talking about the regular talking points that thought has created, like something else. And not to make it mechanical, but just to unfold the structure so then it flowers naturally. Because, we just talked about how we defect linguistically and semantically through thought inside of ourselves. But then we also do that with other people on purpose or without knowing it. So this is sort of a language tit-for-tat game, which is probably what they're talking about as well, like defect, cooperate. So it's about cooperative language. But that doesn't mean always, right? Because you don't want to get just drawn into anything. It's sensing when to do that. And that's important because, like we keep coming back to, in the first mania, we go around just trying to cooperate linguistically with everyone. And not everyone wants that. So how we defect semantically without even knowing it when communicating with others, or the inner voice. So I guess all that I just talked about, I kind of wrote it down already. I didn't know. The inner voice is defecting from the moment or thought and the self. The what is. Dwelling on the what was or what should be is a defection. Maybe even a defect. The I, as in the self, is tit, the observer. And the rest of the sentence, the observed, is tat. And tit-tat sounds like the tick of a clock, of psychological time. So Krishnamurti talks about psychological time. So here I'm seeing that the tick-tock of the psychological time clock is the ego, the observer, and the observed, right? Because when the I is saying something, as a thought, it's already defecting because it's projecting. I didn't expect that to rhyme. So projecting is defecting, right? It's defecting from seeing the moment because a person is looking at their projection. They're not looking at the moment. They're looking at a filter. So this is the tit-tat within, or the tit for tat within consciousness, which is within the structure of thought itself, within one thought. And then there's the tit for tat that is from thought to thought, like one thought rejecting or resisting another, or even liking it for that matter. And tat sounds like tattle, or is it tattle? The ego tells tall tales. The ego tells tall tattle tales. It's always lying to itself. But even this is a lie in that it cannot lie to itself, in quotes, something that is not there. All of it is within the filter. It's a filter, not an I looking at the filter. And this tit-tat is that which muddies it up. So it can't lie to itself, something that is not there. It is the itself, too. The itself, the self, it's. The I, the observer, the tit, and the predicate of the sentence, the it, the tat. So it's kind of it for self. When we make things into its, we it and we create the self, or we it to self. The self its, it others, it divides. It's more like self its, not itself. The self its, it's backwards. Let's put it in the backwards book. Itself its. What is distorted to what is it, or I know what it is. Notice that what is, that spiritual term, doesn't include it. They never say what is it, which makes it other, and that would make it a question, even though the ego, in a sense, doesn't ask what it is or what is it. It just says that it knows. Conversation is a lower frequency perceived by the self-it structure. And this is deception. It, small I, small t, when capitalized, goes to capital I, capital T. IT, information technology. Thought, seeing its, thinks that information technology is the way to go, is the answer. That the answer lies in objectivity. See it. Acausal requires a higher bandwidth. The whole is made up of C-moments. See moments. See it. See the moment, the whole. See moments. A moment in physics is a direction, like a vector. When the self its, we see just 1% of our field of vision in HD, and the rest is blurry. The arrow of perception, there is no time. one pathless land. What you are is perception moments in a pathless land. So I'm going to take a break. I may not talk again today. I feel a bit tired now. So I'm going to rest with my legs elevated. And then when I have a bit of rest, I'm going to start working on the Re-Uncovery structure. What I'm seeing now is this flow of being in dialogue to continue just to expand, which is, my own Re-Uncovery, and then spending time to work on the Re-Uncovery framework in order to be able to share that with others. And even a subtle nuanced thing is I might say to myself, if I have insights to expand on, write them in a notebook. And then if I have Re-Uncovery stuff, write them on a sticky note. Or if I do write an insight on a sticky note, put that on my notebook. Because I do keep those separate in my notes in my computer. But since I just started writing out notes or sticky notes, and I just started writing in a notebook, I think making that distinction would help me stay more organized if I'm going to have this dual process going on. And I just saw this now, and I think that's helpful.